Number 7. Dangerous favors. In January 2023, a Florida man fell victim to a deceitful plot, highlighting the perils of naivety in online interactions. Gracie Lemke, a 20-year-old resident of Florida, was apprehended for orchestrating a violent ambush after enticing the unsuspecting man with the promise of sexual favors. The victim was contacted by Lemke via Facebook Messenger, where she made explicit commitments to engage in sexual acts with him. Trusting her words, the naive individual agreed to meet Lemke in the nearby town of Adamsville, arriving by car as reported by the village's news. Upon his arrival, the situation took a sinister turn when Joshua Timmons, a 24-year-old individual, abruptly emerged and took control of the situation. While the victim found himself being held back by Timmons, Lemke and another accomplice named Lauren Locher began rifling through his SUV in search of valuables, as detailed by the police. Fearing for his safety, the victim managed to break free from Timmons' grasp and fled down the road. In a shocking turn of events, Timmons resorted to violence. He pulled out a gun and fired a single shot into the victim's back, with the bullet exiting through his abdomen. Struggling in pain in the road, the victim was left to his own devices. The treacherous trio wasted no time, making off with the victim's 2008 Chevrolet Blazer, speeding toward the residence where Timmons and Lemke were residing. Law enforcement promptly arrived at the scene, catching Timmons attempting to destroy crucial evidence by incinerating his clothing. A subsequent search warrant uncovered a bloody knife, 55 grams of marijuana, and drug paraphernalia, further implicating the suspects. All three individuals were taken into custody. Timmons is now facing attempted murder charges, while Lemke and Locher are dealing with burglary allegations. The victim underwent emergency surgery and remains in critical condition, serving as a reminder of the dangers that can arise from naive interactions with strangers online. Number 6. Stealing makeup. On September 1st, 2014, a shoplifting incident at the Ulta beauty store in Fayetteville, Arkansas led to the arrest of Brandy Allen, a 31-year-old woman. Allen's alleged theft, valued at $144 in eyeshadow, ultimately exposed her naivety and led to her apprehension. According to a preliminary report, police responded to a shoplifting call at the store, which is located on North Mall Avenue. The witness reported observing Allen's suspicious behavior as she grabbed multiple handfuls of makeup products without checking colors, prices, or labels. Allen, seemingly attempting to divert attention, had entered the store with an unidentified woman who engaged store employees with questions and distractions. Upon arrival, an officer confronted Allen. Interestingly, the original caller identified herself as the store's general manager and requested to inspect Allen's purse. Allen, clearly flustered, took several minutes to rummage through her purse, producing various packages of eyeshadow. Then, in a desperate attempt to avoid detection, she ran her fingers through the top of each package, creating the illusion that they had been used. Amidst her struggle, Allen began loudly cursing and defiantly proclaimed, "No one effing saw me steal anything." Her profanity-laden outburst drew the attention of other customers, including young children, as noted by the officer in the report. Despite her efforts to manipulate the situation, Allen's deception became even more apparent. The store manager pointed out a red eyeliner that an employee had assisted Allen with at the counter, and Allen insisted it was hers and deliberately broke it in front of the officer and store manager to make it appear used. The officer subsequently took Allen into custody, estimating the stolen makeup's value at $144. Allen's bond was set at $830, and on the same day she was booked, she managed to secure her release from the Washington County Detention Center. As of the last available update in 2015, there have been no further developments in her case, leaving the details of her punishment uncertain. This incident serves as a cautionary tale, illustrating how naivety and desperation can lead to ill-advised actions with significant legal consequences. Number 5. Taco Hell. In late August 2023, a knife-wielding man found himself in legal trouble in Connecticut following a reckless incident that underscored his naivety about avoiding consequences. Jonathan Jenkins, a 21-year-old resident of Southington, allegedly confronted fast food restaurant employees at Taco Bell on Queen Street over an online food order dispute. The incident unfolded when Jenkins exited the drive-thru, parked his vehicle, and approached the restaurant's entrance while brandishing an open pocket knife. Two employees ventured outside to discuss his order, prompting a call to the Southington Police Department at approximately 11 p.m. According to police reports, Jenkins advanced aggressively toward the employees, causing them to scatter in different directions out of fear. Jenkins, in a menacing manner, pursued one of the employees before abruptly returning to his vehicle, apparently attempting to flee the scene based on Lieutenant Keith Egan's statement. Responding officers initially received reports that one of the Taco Bell employees possessed a firearm. However, it was later determined that no firearm was involved in the altercation. In a remarkable display of inexperience, Jenkins struck a curb within the parking lot while making his getaway, resulting in a flat tire and damage to the vehicle's undercarriage. Police located the compromised vehicle at the parking lot's exit onto Queen Street, with Jenkins in the driver's seat and several passengers on board. Fortunately, though, no injuries were reported in this incident. Jonathan Jenkins now faces a series of charges, including second-degree threatening, first-degree reckless endangerment, second-degree breach of peace, and operating a motor vehicle without a license. He was detained on a $25,000 bond and was scheduled for arraignment in New Britain Superior Court the following day. One of the passengers in Jenkins' car, identified as 18-year-old Clifford Schwartz of Southington, was found in possession of a brass knuckle and a knife combination. But despite the serious charges of carrying a dangerous weapon and illegal possession of a weapon in a motor vehicle, Schwartz was released without bail. His arraignment was then scheduled for the upcoming Monday. Number 4. Fake diplomas. Over nearly a decade, from 2003 to 2012, James Enowich of Cromwell, Connecticut, found himself caught in a fraudulent scheme involving the operation of multiple diploma mills. This elaborate scam came to light in Philadelphia, where Enowich was charged with mail fraud and aiding and abetting mail fraud, accentuating the consequences of his misguided belief that he could evade detection. The scheme was initiated as early as 2003, when Enowich and a co-schemer launched a diploma mill. They advertised and sold diplomas for a fee but required no coursework to earn them. This operation eventually expanded to include at least 7 different websites, each selling fake degrees. Each site was linked to an entity with the same name, owned by Enowich and his partner, and operated as diploma mills with no faculty, academic curriculum, or educational services. They weren't recognized by the United States Department of Education. To bolster their credibility, the pair even invented a fraudulent accrediting body called the National Distance Learning Accreditation Council. Enowich and his associates took the deception further by creating phony transcripts, falsely claiming that buyers had completed coursework they'd never done. They allowed purchasers to fabricate their own transcripts and backdate degrees. They also provided fraudulent verification services to support the fake degrees, in case verification was sought by employers or other parties. These deceitful services were advertised with degree packages ranging from $475 to $550 for associates, bachelor's, master's, and doctoral level degrees, even offering a multi-degree discount for bulk purchases. And for an extra fee, buyers could even select grades for the fictitious courses included in their transcripts. If convicted, Enowich faces a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. He may also be subject to a $250,000 fine, a $100 special assessment, and an order of forfeiture. Unfortunately, though, the outcome of the case is unclear. The elaborate nature of this fraud highlights the importance of maintaining the integrity of academic credentials and the consequences for those who attempt to exploit it. Enowich's belief that he could evade justice ultimately led to his apprehension and legal consequences. Number 3. Don't steal from 7-Eleven. On July 29, 2023, an incident unfolded at a Stockton 7-Eleven store where store clerks were caught on video beating an alleged thief with a stick. The video went viral and garnered national attention. However, the San Joaquin County District Attorney's Office announced that the store clerks wouldn't face any criminal charges, emphasizing their role as victims and the necessity to hold the individual attempting to rob them accountable. The video, viewed millions of times, depicted a man in a blue mask emptying shelves of cigarettes and other products into a trash can, while a witness can be heard telling the employees, "Ain't nothing you can do, man, until police come here." But that wasn't actually the case. As the masked man attempted to leave the store with the stolen items, the employees decided to intervene. One clerk seized the trash can, pinning the man to the ground, while the other used what appeared to be a wooden stick to strike the man nearly 24 times. The incident followed a series of attempted robberies at the same 7-Eleven location on South Center Street. On July 28th, an employee reported a man entering the store, threatening to shoot the employee if stopped, and stealing cigarettes and other items. The next day, the same man reappeared, demanded money while mimicking a gun with his hand, and attempted to steal food items. Then later that morning, the video incident occurred. 42-year-old Tyrone Frazier was subsequently arrested in connection with this series of robberies, burglary, and other outstanding warrants. While some praised the employees for defending their business and property, lawmakers in California, including Senator Dave Cortez, introduced Senate Bill 553 to ban retail staff from intervening when thieves are stealing from their stores. This legislation had passed the state Senate and moved to policy committees in the state assembly. However, this bill could have devastating consequences. If thieves fear no repercussions for stealing like this robber at the 7-Eleven, then crime will go up exponentially. The incident also sparked political discussion, with Senator Ted Cruz commenting on it and criticizing policies related to crime and law enforcement. However, it's important to note that the alleged thief was being investigated for robbery, while the employees weren't under investigation for assault. The San Joaquin County District Attorney's Office clarified that the store clerks weren't considered suspects in the case and wouldn't face any charges. The decision by the District Attorney's Office received support from the community, and it aimed to dispel misinformation and clarify that the employees weren't being held responsible for their actions in protecting the store. This incident highlighted the complexities surrounding retail theft and the legal repercussions for those involved. Number 2. Playing dumb. On April 10, 2022, a chilling incident occurred outside a bar in East Peoria, Illinois, where a 23-year-old university student named Stephanie Melgoza hit and killed 2 people with her car while driving under the influence. Newly released body cam footage reveals her disturbing behavior shortly after the crash, highlighting her attempt to play dumb when confronted with her crimes. The video, published by Law and Crime, shows Melgoza, who was 3 times over the legal blood alcohol limit, smiling, laughing, and pretending to be clueless during her interaction with authorities at the crash scene. During a field sobriety test, she struggled to follow a police officer's instructions and remarked, "I told you, it's hard." She then failed all the field sobriety tests administered by responding officers. Footage from OSF St. Francis Hospital, where Melgoza was taken after the crash, depicts her displaying similar obliviousness to the gravity of the situation. She spent several minutes singing and dancing on the exam table before inquiring about retrieving her car. The responding officer sternly informed her that she was going to jail without bond for killing 2 people and that her car was now a crime scene. Then in May 2023, Melgoza, now 24, was sentenced to 14 years in prison after pleading guilty to 4 felony charges, including 2 counts of aggravated DUI death and 2 counts of aggravated reckless driving. The sentencing hearing was attended by the family members of the victims, Andrea Rosevitz and Paul Proent. Melgoza's defense attorney, Kevin Sullivan, maintained that his client deeply regretted the incident and had been vilified from various angles. He emphasized that she never intended for such a tragic outcome and would carry the remorse for the rest of her life. Melgoza, in her apology to the victims' family members, expressed that she never meant to hurt anybody and acknowledged that she'd live with the consequences for the rest of her life. Reports from East Peoria police indicated that on the fateful day, Melgoza had consumed 3 vodka drinks before driving and hitting the victims. A responding police officer observed slurred speech, watery eyes, and a strong alcohol odor on her breath. The deadly DUI crash occurred just weeks before Melgoza was set to graduate from Bradley University. However, due to the incident, she faced backlash from fellow students, resulting in her removal from the list of students eligible to participate in the graduation ceremony. Despite this, though, the university president permitted her to accept her diploma. Number 1. Hate crime. In late July 2023, a 17-year-old individual found himself facing an indictment on a murder charge in a shocking incident that highlighted his profound ignorance in believing that a hate crime would go unnoticed. The ordeal unfolded in New York, where prosecutors revealed that the stabbing occurred following a confrontation sparked by derogatory taunts aimed at a group of men dancing shirtless to Beyoncé while gassing up their car. Brooklyn District Attorney Eric Gonzalez asserted that O'Shea Sibley's tragic death was driven by both anti-black and anti-LGBTQ bias. Gonzalez emphasized, in light of the situation at hand, that it was evident that a significant contributing factor to this attack was the fact that individuals took offense to Mr. Sibley and his friends engaging in dancing and celebration. The suspect is now set to appear in court to answer for the charge, and if convicted, he could face a minimum of 20 years in prison. Attempts to reach his attorney, Mark Pollard, for comment were unsuccessful, and the teen's grandmother claimed he was defending himself. But prosecutors have refused to release the suspect's name. The tragic chain of events leading to Sibley's death began when he and his friends were dancing at a Brooklyn gas station, prompting taunts from another group of individuals. Security camera footage depicted both groups engaging in a heated argument before briefly disengaging. Sibley and a friend then later returned to confront one of the individuals who'd remained behind, recording the altercation on his phone. And in the video, 28-year-old Sibley could be seen following the person and then lunging at him, disappearing from the camera's view. Then, moments later, Sibley reappeared on camera, checking his side, before collapsing to the sidewalk. Gonzalez emphasized that the video indicated Sibley's rightful attempt to protect himself and his friends from anti-gay and anti-black slurs. He underscored that Sibley and his friends were unarmed and stated that defending yourself from anti-gay or anti-black comments, or arguing back, isn't a cause for someone to take a weapon and do what was done in this case. Gonzalez also expressed confidence in the charges being substantiated during the trial. O'Shea Sibley was a dancer who performed with the Philadanco Dance Company in Philadelphia and New York. He'd even taken classes with the Alvin Alley American Dance Theater's Alley Extension program. He used dance to celebrate his LGBTQ identity through works like Soft, A Love Letter to Black Queer Men, choreographed by Kamar Jewel. His untimely death drew whispered tributes from politicians and celebrities, including Beyoncé and filmmaker Spike Lee, underscoring the profound impact he had on those who knew him. Number 13. Jordan Graham. 8 days after their wedding in 2013, newlyweds Jordan Graham and Cody Johnson went on a hike together at Glacier National Park in Montana. 22-year-old Jordan returned from the hike alone, and when others began to notice that Cody was missing, she said he'd gone out with friends and that she hadn't heard from him since. However, investigators suspected the young woman of knowing more than she was saying, especially when Cody's boss reported him missing and Jordan never contacted the police at all. Once the investigation was underway, she claimed to receive an email from an anonymous person telling her not to bother looking for Cody because he'd fallen off a cliff at the park and was dead. Law enforcement searched the area the next day, and Jordan participated alongside other volunteers. And suspiciously, she just happened to be the one to discover his body at the base of a 200-foot cliff. As the evidence against Jordan continued to mount, interrogators dialed up the pressure during questioning. She eventually broke down and admitted that she'd pushed Cody off a cliff during their hike, and as a result, she was charged with murder. People were shocked, especially since the murder occurred during what was supposed to be one of the happiest times of a couple's lives. They couldn't imagine why a new bride would want to kill her husband, and they thought that Jordan and Cody seemed like a good match. Jordan was raised in a deeply religious household. Her faith was important to her and she wanted a simple life, to get married and raise children as a stay-at-home mom. Cody shared this vision, and he was especially attracted to Jordan's wholesomeness. He loved that she was a churchgoer and had eagerly joined her congregation, where he fit right in with the parishioners. But at the couple's wedding, guests noticed that Jordan seemed unhappy, and by the next afternoon, she was reportedly telling her friends that she was already having second thoughts about the marriage. However, people chalked her behavior up to a typical case of cold feet, and they certainly never imagined she was capable of killing her groom. Jordan took a plea deal and admitted to second-degree murder in exchange for a 30-year sentence followed by 5 years of probation. And as part of the agreement, she was required to give a fully honest account of what happened. She said she killed Cody because she was terrified of intimacy due to her strict upbringing. So, instead of being honest with her new husband, who sounds like a pretty patient and understanding guy, she apparently decided that the best solution was to shove him to his death. Number 12. Margot Tocci. Late one night in 2012, a New Jersey man accepted his ex-girlfriend's invitation to take a ride in her new car. 19-year-old Margot Tocci picked her former flame up and drove to a local high school, where she suggested they get out of the car and take a walk. Two men then ambushed the ever-trusting ex and beat him with a baseball bat and a pipe. As Margot stood by and watched, it became clear to the victim that he'd been set up. The attackers stole the cash out of his wallet and smashed his cell phone, and the trio left the man bleeding on the ground as they got into Margot's car and fled the scene. Police arrested Margot several hours later. She went viral for flashing an ear-to-ear grin in her mugshot, but she probably wasn't smiling when she realized just how seriously authorities were taking the case. The next day, law enforcement caught up with Margot's boyfriend at the time, 20-year-old Danielle Shorpez, who initially denied having any involvement in the crime. A third co-conspirator, 27-year-old Samer Saleh, was also arrested. Margot Tocci was convicted of a conspiracy charge and was sentenced to a year in county jail, while Danielle Shorpez received a 4-year prison sentence for theft by unlawful taking. And Samer Saleh, after being convicted of a conspiracy charge, was sentenced to 4 years behind bars. Number 11. Eric Betchler. From the outside looking in, Eric Betchler and his wife Peggy had it all. They were young, attractive, and successful. They drove flashy cars, owned a beautiful house along the Pacific coast, and had 3 healthy kids. But their all-American bliss was rudely interrupted during the summer of 1997 when a boat captain found Eric clinging to a boogie board off Southern California. Nearby, Eric's rented motorboat was running in circles at a high speed, and as he splashed around in the water, he could be heard yelling that his wife had fallen out of the boat. Peggy, however, was nowhere in sight. The boat captain rescued Eric while the Coast Guard responded to the scene, but despite their best efforts, Peggy was never found. Eric told law enforcement that he and Peggy rented the boat while celebrating their anniversary and Peggy's birthday, and on their way back to shore, Peggy drove the boat while Eric rode the boogie board. He claimed he hit a large wave and was pulled under, and that Peggy had vanished by the time he surfaced. Detectives noticed that Eric was calm on the way back to shore, then suddenly began acting hysterical in front of the waiting media circus. There were no actual tears streaming down his face, and he suddenly stopped crying when they were away from the cameras. The investigation was just beginning, and authorities already suspected foul play. 3 months after Peggy vanished, Eric met a beautiful, struggling model named Tina New. They began dating right away, and Tina moved in with Eric just days later. Eric's ability to move on so soon after his wife's disappearance raised major red flags for both law enforcement and Peggy's family. Detectives then approached Tina and urged her to call them if she came across any information about Peggy's accident. In the meantime, Eric's best friend Kobe Laker came forward with suspicions of his own after initially protecting his buddy during police questioning. Laker claimed that in the months leading up to Peggy's disappearance, Eric said he was sick and tired of her and that he couldn't take it anymore. During one particularly chilling conversation, Eric allegedly asked for Kobe's opinion of his idea to murder Peggy, put her body in a barrel, and dump it in the ocean. Kobe then agreed to wear a wire and confront Eric, but much to the frustration of the police, he stood by his story that it was a terrible accident. Detectives remained convinced that Eric killed Peggy, but knowing it and proving it are two different things. More than 2 years went by before Tina began noticing inconsistencies between Eric's story and news reports of Peggy's disappearance, and when she confronted him, his story also began to change. Tina later told Dateline's Josh Mankiewicz that after initially claiming that he was unable to help Peggy, Eric admitted that he could have helped her but didn't. Tina could tell he still wasn't being completely forthcoming, and she made it her personal mission to get the truth. Bits and pieces of it came out over time, adding up to one big, horrifying picture. According to Tina, Eric confessed to luring Peggy out for what she thought would be some quality time together on their anniversary. He allegedly brought weights onto the boat and used one of them to hit his wife in the back of the head, knocking her unconscious. Then he tied her up with rope, put her body in a trash bag, tied on some weights, and dropped Peggy in the water. 2 weeks later, Tina's neighbor overheard the couple arguing and called the police. She told them all about Eric's confession and agreed to wear a wire. Eric didn't confess on tape to the extent that police had hoped, but it was enough to finally charge him with murder. Prosecutors alleged that he was motivated by his unhappiness in the marriage and Peggy's $2 million life insurance policy. Eric's attorney argued that Tina's story about the confession was the product of a drug-fueled fantasy. The lawyer also tried to paint Tina out as an unreliable witness by bringing up her criminal history, but the jury found her credible despite her checkered past, and Eric Batchelor was convicted of first-degree murder, and now he's serving life behind bars without the possibility of parole. Number 10. Laurie Eisenberg. 68-year-old Larry Eisenberg went missing during a morning boat ride with his wife on Idaho's Lake Coeur d'Alene in February 2018. Suspicion soon fell on his wife, Laurie Eisenberg, who told what seemed like a far-fetched story. It was odd in the first place for someone to go for a sunrise boat ride on Lake Coeur d'Alene during the wintertime, when temperatures are typically unpleasantly frigid. During the outing, Laurie called 911 and claimed that Larry fell overboard while leaning forward to inspect a broken boat propeller. She also said that she tripped and hit her head when she tried rushing over to help him. But after regaining her composure, she drove the boat around for at least an hour in search of her husband and then called police after finding no signs of him. However, her story would change several times throughout the ensuing investigation. A few weeks later, a separate investigation found evidence that Laurie had committed serious financial crimes. She was accused of embezzling nearly $580,000 during her time running a non-profit called the North Idaho Housing Coalition, which helps low-income people in need obtain housing. As the investigation into Larry's disappearance played out, Laurie was charged with 40 counts of forgery and 1 count of grand theft. Then, Larry's body was found a month after he disappeared. A toxicology report revealed that he had a lethal level of Benadryl in his system when he died, furthering investigators' suspicions of foul play. By then, Laurie had gone on the run and skipped 2 of her court dates for the fraud case. But she finally turned herself in more than 4 months later. In early 2019, she pleaded guilty to 4 fraud-related counts and was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, and authorities finally charged her with Larry's murder the following year. Prosecutors claimed that news of Laurie's financial crimes were about to hit the local press and that she knew Larry would likely divorce her if he found out about the allegations she was facing. It was no coincidence that Larry died on the day the article was published. In an email to the Housing Coalition shortly before the news broke, Laurie asked for time to grieve for Larry, but promised she'd repay the money she owed. Before their lives were suddenly rocked by not 1 but 2 major scandals within less than a month, Laurie and Larry's children thought their parents' marriage was more or less perfect. The only outward signs of anything being wrong revolved mainly around Larry's frustrations over his wife constantly forking money over to her adult daughters. Investigators suspect that this played a role in her decision to start stealing from the non-profit in 2016. Laurie entered an all-but plea to second-degree murder, which meant that she maintained her innocence but admitted that there was likely enough evidence for the prosecution to secure a conviction against her if the case were to go to trial. As a result, she was sentenced to life in prison with the eligibility for parole after 30 years. At her sentencing, Laurie claimed that she'd spiked her own drink with Benadryl because she planned on drinking it herself. She said that Larry helped himself to the beverage while she was asleep on the boat. Many, if not most people, don't seem to believe this version of events, but Laurie has never admitted to deliberately killing her husband. And whether she ever will remains to be seen. Number 9. Jason Harris. On a September evening in 2014, police officers responded to the Davison, Michigan home of 36-year-old mother of two, Christina Ann Thompson Harris. A neighbor had stopped over to check on Christina at the request of her husband, 44-year-old Jason Harris, who was at work at the time. Jason said that Christina was still asleep when he left that day, and he wanted to make sure she was all right. But the neighbor immediately noticed that she was cold to the touch and dialed 911. By the time police arrived, it was far too late to save Christina. Jason left work and came home, where he told law enforcement that Christina had been battling a cold recently. A toxicology report found a lethal amount of heroin in her system, and authorities initially wrote the woman's death off as an accidental overdose. After all, everything pointed toward this being the case. Christina's family insisted that she wasn't a drug user. They were 100% sure of this, not only because it wasn't in her custom to use drugs, but because she had a baby who was breastfeeding. After all, her loved ones knew she'd never put her kids in danger, and they came up with a genius way to prove it. There were numerous packets of breast milk in the freezer. If Christina were a drug user, it would definitely show up on toxicology tests of the milk. But the milk tested completely clean of drugs, proving that Christina had, in fact, died under suspicious circumstances. Naturally, Jason Harris was the first person police looked at as a possible suspect in the case. They discovered that he stood to gain $120,000 from his deceased wife's life insurance policy. It may not sound like a lot, but people have killed for much less. Jason's brother told investigators that he'd made some concerning comments about wanting to get rid of Christina, while other people revealed that he was talking to multiple other women. 9 days after Christina's death, Jason bought a plane ticket to visit a woman in another state. And it wasn't long before his new girlfriend, or one of them at least, had moved in with him. He also allegedly confessed to co-workers that he'd killed his wife by pouring her a bowl of cereal and lacing it with heroin, and that he'd been lacing her food and drinks for weeks to knock her out. According to colleagues, he said that Christina dropped the bowl on the floor and collapsed while eating the cereal. It was no secret to Jason's work crew that he hated Christina. He trash-talked her constantly, and on more than one occasion he alluded to wanting her dead so he wouldn't have to pay the alimony or child support that would come with a divorce. In fact, he'd even allegedly offered a co-worker $10,000 to kill his wife, and another co-worker reportedly admitted to selling him Xanax, which was also used to drug Christina. Sadly, Christina seemed blissfully unaware of her husband's true feelings. Had she known, it might have motivated her to leave. In the end, a jury convicted Jason of first-degree murder, solicitation of murder, and delivery of a controlled substance causing death. He was sentenced to life in prison, which likely would have never happened if Christina's family hadn't fought so hard to ensure that justice was served. Number 8. Leslie Ann Galt. An Irish father of 3 named Paul Galt was brutally bludgeoned to death with a hockey stick inside his own home in the year 2000. Police accused his wife Leslie Ann Galt of masterminding the crime and having her secret lover, local fire chief Gordon Graham, carry it out. According to records, Graham lied in wait one morning at the couple's home in Northern Ireland, where the killer ambushed Paul out of nowhere, and as a result, Graham and Leslie were charged with murder. Prosecutors acknowledged that Leslie wasn't present at the scene when her husband was killed, but they accused her of providing Graham with the information he needed to carry the crime out successfully and of luring Paul to his death. On the day of the murder, Paul was under the impression that he and Leslie were going to spend the weekend away on a mini vacation. The last thing he was expecting was for a man who was carrying on an affair with his wife to appear without warning and beat him to death. Paul did know about the affair, though, He'd just recently found out about it, making the timing of his death even more suspicious. After first being convicted and sentenced to life, then tried 2 more times and ultimately cleared of any wrongdoing, Leslie was freed from any accountability related to the crime. She said she felt morally responsible due to her affair, but fought a relentless battle in court to legally prove her innocence. Not everyone was happy about the outcome, but the justice system can't please everyone. The jury wavered a lot less when it came to deciding Graham's guilt, especially since there was DNA evidence connecting him to the crime scene. In the end, he was sentenced to life in prison and was paroled in 2021. In recent years, Leslie Galt and her current husband have dedicated themselves to their faith, and these days she's the leader of a Pentecostal church in the Republic of Ireland. Number 7. Hakan Aysal. 32-year-old Semra Aysal was both heavily pregnant and terrified of heights when her husband, 40-year-old Hakan Aysal, decided to take her to a scenic overlook in southern Turkey in 2018. During the outing in what's known as Butterfly Valley, Hakan coaxed Semra to the edge of the cliff, saying that he wanted to take a selfie together. But instead of snapping a memorable photo, he shoved his 7 months pregnant wife over the edge, sending her plummeting 1,000 feet to her death. Just like anyone who shoves their partner off a ledge, Hakan attributed the tragedy to Semra losing her balance and falling. He then tried to collect on a $40,000 life insurance policy he took out in his wife's name shortly before he killed her, and financial records showed that he'd taken out 7 loans in Semra's name while she was still alive. Hakan denied murdering Semra. He claimed that he turned his back for just a few moments and suddenly heard Semra scream, and when he turned around, she was gone. Police didn't believe the story, and Hakan was charged with murder. During the court proceedings, witnesses testified about how Hakan was eerily calm as he sought help for Semra and his unborn baby. He didn't even bother joining a passing driver who went to go search for Semra's body after Hakan flagged him down. And in a chilling twist, another witness described how something about the couple's behavior toward each other prompted her and the person she was with to joke about which one might push the other off the cliff. And while nobody managed to record footage of Hakan pushing Semra off the edge, someone else who was at the park that day captured a video of Hakan trying to persuade his wife to come closer to the end of the cliff. In it, Hakan is acting overly pushy, to the point where he's practically dragging Semra over to the edge. During Hakan's trial, Semra's brother described seeing no emotion from his brother-in-law right after Semra's death, even as the family went to retrieve the slain woman's body from the medical examiner's office. Hakan was found guilty of murder and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 30 years. He appealed his conviction on the grounds of insanity, but the original ruling was upheld. Number 6. Lonnie Lauren Cacontes. After their marriage ended during the late 90s, attorney Lonnie Lauren Cacontes remained on cordial terms with his second wife and legal assistant, Mickey Kanasaki. And when Cacontes filed for divorce from his third wife in 2005, he and Kanasaki became intimate again, but their rekindled romance was no fairy tale. Over the years, Cacontes and Kanasaki had argued bitterly over money and assets. Cacontes wanted to sell their house in California, but Kanasaki was adamantly against putting it up for sale. And while Kanasaki was financially savvy and trustworthy with money, Cacontes acted like she wasn't, and he oversaw her financial activity like a hawk. They nevertheless continued to carry on a complicated relationship that didn't exactly qualify as a committed situation, but functioned a lot like one in a day-to-day sense. In 2006, Cacontes booked Mediterranean cruise tickets for himself and Kanasaki. He told her it would be a chance for them to work on their relationship and maybe even officially get back together. In the weeks leading up to the cruise, Cacontes allegedly told his friend Bill Price that he was only carrying on a relationship with Kanasaki because he was afraid she'd go after her legally entitled share of his money and assets. He was more attracted to his third ex-wife and merely saw Kanasaki as an obligation. As a successful lawyer, Cacontes could have afforded a nice cruise, but the excursion they went on was a converted car ferry operated by a little-known company that catered almost exclusively to working-class European customers. He and Kanazaki were the only Americans on the ship, called the Island Escape, and even the travel agent who booked the trip for Cacontes thought his choice was extremely strange. On the third day of the voyage, Cacontes reported Kanazaki missing. He said they'd returned to their room at around midnight, and he went to bed. But 4 hours later, he woke up and realized his travel companion wasn't in the room. A scientific research ship discovered Kanazaki's body off the Italian coast the next day, and according to the medical examiner who performed her autopsy, she was strangled to death before she ever entered the water. This fact only furthered investigators' suspicions that she was murdered. Cacontes didn't even try to act emotional about his ex-wife's death, which seemed like a red flag among law enforcement. But he didn't seem too concerned about that either. He didn't even bother notifying his former in-laws of Kanazaki's death. When questioned by the FBI, Cacontes said that he thought Kanazaki got seasick and fell off their stateroom balcony while throwing up over the railing. A closer look at the ship's design showed that unlike most cruise ships, the lower decks didn't protrude out any further than the upper decks. In other words, if someone fell off a higher level balcony, there was little risk of them landing on any other decks on their way down. Prosecutors would later accuse Cacontes of choosing the ship for this reason, to ensure that his victim made it into the water. They also claimed that Cacontes likely didn't think Kanazaki's body would ever be found, and if it hadn't been, he might have gotten away with the murder. The investigation dragged on for years before Cacontes was finally charged in connection with the case in 2013, and in 2020, 14 years after Kanazaki's death, he was found guilty of murder and was sentenced to life in federal prison. Number 5. Harold Henthorne. In September 2012, 58-year-old Harold Henthorne and his wife, 50-year-old Toni Henthorne, celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary with a hike in Colorado's Rocky Mountain National Park. But what began as a scenic sightseeing trip ended in tragedy when, surprise, surprise, Toni landed at the bottom of a 130-foot cliff. She'd stopped on top of the cliff to snap a photo and plunged face first to the ground below. Toni died from her injuries, and as Harold soon learned, law enforcement wasn't so quick to write it off as a tragic accident. He claimed that his wife had stumbled and fell, but the circumstances caused investigators to wonder if he'd pushed Toni. Harold had marked an X on a map at the very spot where she was standing when she suddenly went over the edge. Toni had undergone multiple knee surgeries, so police thought it was weird that the couple had hiked up that particular path, which was known to be challenging. And they didn't have to look hard for a motive. Harold stood to gain $4.7 million from Toni's life insurance policy. There were no other witnesses to the incident, so police would have to find other ways to either corroborate or disprove Harold's claims. During the investigation, detectives learned about a previous incident where a 20-foot beam had fallen on Toni at the couple's mountain cabin. And if she hadn't bent over to protect herself before being hit, she would have died. In hindsight, it appeared to be a failed first attempt by Harold to murder Toni. Investigators also discovered that Harold Henthorne's first wife, Sandra Lynn Henthorne, had also died under suspicious circumstances back in 1995, a few months after the couple's 12th wedding anniversary. In this case, Harold was also conveniently the only witness. He claimed that Sandra was changing a tire when the car slipped off a jack and crushed her to death. Authorities suspected foul play, but with no bystanders to challenge Harold's narrative and not enough concrete evidence to prosecute him, they weren't in a position to press criminal charges. According to some of Harold's friends, he researched the finances of 3 different women before deciding to pursue Toni as his second wife. She was a successful ophthalmologist who came from a family with oil wealth, which meant that she had the one thing her husband was after: money. A federal jury convicted Harold of Toni's murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. He appealed his conviction multiple times, including as recently as 2022, and has been denied each time. And while he hasn't been tried for Sandra's death, it's widely believed that he murdered her as well. Number 4. Amanda Lee Cowan. When 47-year-old Derek Brian Cowan left a tumultuous and violent marriage to his wife Amanda Cowan in 2019, his family did their best to support him in hopes that it would prevent him from going back to her. As his sister would later put it, they were trying to extricate him from Amanda's grasp. However, Derek found it impossible to say no to Amanda when she called him one night and said she wanted to discuss the possibility of trying to make their marriage work. So he went to Amanda's apartment in Edmonton, Alberta, and was jumped by 3 men as soon as he walked in the door. The attackers duct-taped Derek to a chair, then repeatedly beat and stabbed him. At one point, he managed to escape and ran to a bathroom where he barricaded the door. But one of his assailants barged their way in and killed him with a machete. The group planned to stuff Derek's body into a large hockey bag, but they were busted by Amanda's roommate, who arrived home and witnessed the carnage that had just occurred. She called the police, and 4 suspects were promptly arrested. Amanda was initially charged with first-degree murder. She admitted to a reduced manslaughter charge and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. On top of receiving a light sentence to begin with, she was given a half-day of time served credit for each day she spent out on bail in the comfort of her own home. Her boyfriend at the time, Jacob Cook, pleaded guilty to manslaughter and received a 6-year prison sentence. The young man who inflicted the fatal damage to Derek's body was convicted of second-degree murder, and a 4th unnamed suspect was convicted of being an accessory after the fact. For Derek's loved ones, the outcome of the case was a far cry from justice. And while Amanda apologized to his family at her sentencing, she never explained why she felt the need to exact deadly revenge on her ex when she could have just moved on with her life. Number 3. Sandra Wignall. In what was later described as a crime of lust and greed, 48-year-old Sandra Wignall felt inconvenienced by the existence of her husband Robert after just 9 months of marriage. She was carrying on an affair with a convicted murderer named Terence Bewley, who'd served a 10-year prison sentence for his first killing and wasn't afraid to do it again. One day in 1993, Sandra lured Robert into the woods behind their house in Surrey, England, under the guise of going to feed some wild foxes. Her unsuspecting hubby eagerly trailed behind her. Then, without warning, Sandra began putting some seriously X-rated moves on Robert, and of course, he didn't object. And right as he started getting into it, Terence Bewley and his friend Harold Moult rushed up and attacked him. They beat him and stabbed Robert to death before fleeing the scene. Perhaps the saddest aspect of the murder is the fact that Robert Wignall was known among many as an extremely friendly and harmless person who didn't have a single evil bone in his body. Sandra could have just left if she was unhappy, but instead, she chose to end her husband's life. Sandra told police that 3 teens had ambushed her and Robert in the forest. She even provided descriptions of the imaginary trio to a sketch artist, and police released the composite drawings in hopes of generating tips. At first, the public believed the story and reacted with widespread outrage over what people saw as a society plagued by the moral decay of a younger generation. Sandra maintained her innocence all throughout the case, even when investigators began to suspect her of being involved in the crime. Terence Bewley also denied any involvement, while Harold Moult initially refused the notion that he'd participated in the senseless killing. However, Moult eventually admitted to it after being charged with murder. The information Moult gave to detectives helped lead them to more evidence and provided valuable testimony that helped secure convictions against Sandra Wignall and Terence Bewley. All 3 defendants were convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. During the case, prosecutors worried that Terence Bewley had been paroled way too early from his first life sentence for murder and that it had enabled him to kill again. But oddly enough, he was paroled yet again in 2012 after serving just 19 years, and today he continues to walk free. Number 2. Nathan Carman. In 2016, the crew of a commercial ship spotted a man adrift in the Atlantic on a lifeboat. 22-year-old Nathan Carman had spent 8 days floating helplessly after his boat sank off Rhode Island during a fishing trip, and sadly his mother Linda Carman died in the accident. The tragedy came 3 years after Nathan's grandfather, a wealthy Connecticut businessman named John Chikalos, was fatally shot. To investigators, the suspicious deaths in the family were no coincidence, and relatives felt the same way. After his grandfather's death, Nathan inherited around $500,000. He reportedly blew through the money over the next few years while spending long periods of time unemployed. He was close to running out of cash when the boating accident that killed his mother occurred. Family members had always suspected Nathan of killing Chakalos, and when Linda was presumed lost at sea, they suspected him of also being responsible for her death. And they didn't have to look hard for a motive. As Linda Carmen's sole heir, Nathan stood to gain around $7 million from her death. Despite the mounting suspicions against him, he continued to walk free until 2022, when authorities indicted him on a laundry list of federal charges relating to Linda Carmen's death. He was charged with murder on the high seas and 7 fraud-related counts. Prosecutors believe Nathan deliberately scuttled the boat, an opinion shared by the life insurance company, which refused to pay out on his mom's policy. Unfortunately, though, Nathan will never see justice. He was found dead in his jail cell in June of 2023 while awaiting trial. According to officials, he was discovered unresponsive during the early morning hours at 2:30 a.m. An autopsy ruled that the death wasn't suspicious, but authorities have declined to reveal the exact cause of death. Nathan left behind a note for his lawyers, but its contents haven't been revealed. His most recent attorney, Martin J. Manella, told the New York Times that he had no idea things were going to take such a dark turn. He said that he'd been looking forward to letting the truth be known about his client. Number 1. Carl Carlson. A family in Murphys, California, started the 1991 new year with a house fire that destroyed everything they owned and killed their matriarch. Carl Carlson managed to get the family's 3 children out safely, but he was unable to save his wife, Christina, who died in the blaze. An autopsy concluded that she died from smoke inhalation. And based on the results, it was impossible to tell whether foul play was involved. The scene was questionable, but not highly suspicious. First responders smelled kerosene, which Carl said the family used to heat their home. A container of it had spilled into the carpet recently, leaving a lingering odor. Firefighters wondered why a bathroom window was boarded up, but Carl said that he couldn't afford to fix it at the time. While these explanations didn't completely eliminate suspicion, investigators conceded that the fire could have been accidental. The very next day, Carl packed up the kids and moved across the country to his hometown in Seneca County, New York. When he didn't bother staying for Christina's services, it put her family on high alert. They worked tirelessly to try gathering enough evidence to convince law enforcement to consider the possibility of a homicide, but her death was ultimately ruled an accident. This meant that Carl could collect the $215,000 life insurance payout he was waiting for. 17 years later, in November 2008, Carl and Christina's 23-year-old son, Levi, was crushed to death by a pickup truck he was working on in the family's barn. It appeared as though the vehicle had fallen off a jack hours earlier, leaving Levi helplessly pinned to the ground. A medical examiner initially classified the death as accidental, enabling Carl to collect on the young man's $700,000 life insurance policy he took out shortly before his son's death. When Christina's family caught wind of the tragedy, their first thought was that Carl had gotten away with murder. Again, his estranged second wife, Cindy, told investigators that Carl and Levi had a fractured relationship. But shortly before Levi's death, it appeared as though they were trying to work on things. Carl had persuaded Levi to take out the hefty life insurance policy, and he also took one out on Cindy, causing her to fear that she'd be the next to go. This time, there was enough evidence to charge Carl. He was convicted of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Meanwhile, the state of California found new evidence enabling prosecutors to try Carl for Christina's death as well. In Christina's case, he was convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life without parole. So luckily, he'll never step outside a prison again. Number 11. Sabrina Macri. During the summer of 2016, a concerned civilian noticed a seemingly drunk babysitter stumbling around in search of her car in the Cedar Beach parking lot in Long Island, New York. Later identified as 19-year-old Sabrina Macri, the woman was in no condition to drive, especially with 4 children in her care. Concerned for their safety, the onlooker Nicole Diaz called 911 and used her own car to block the parking lot's exit while waiting for police to arrive. Diaz later told CBS New York that Macri insisted that she was fine, even though it was obvious that she wasn't. The Good Samaritan said that she decided to block the exit when she saw Macri trying to leave, saying there would have been some kind of accident. Macri allegedly berated the responding officers as they took her into custody, saying, "So what if I had a few drinks? That's what people my age do." She was charged with multiple crimes, including driving while intoxicated, child endangerment, and possession of a controlled substance. The young woman was accused of calling one of the cops an expletive loser, but her defense attorney was singing a much different tune on Macri's behalf when he spoke with the media a few days later. The lawyer said that his client was extremely remorseful for her actions and that efforts were being made to get her into a substance abuse treatment program. In the meantime, Macri agreed to obey an order of protection banning her from going near the children she was accused of endangering. Number 10. Rebecca Auburn. When men met up with an Ohio prostitute named Rebecca Auburn, they expected to hand over some cash in exchange for intimacy, but instead they got drugged, robbed, and sometimes killed by the 33-year-old. At least 4 men died, and one narrowly escaped with his life throughout 2023 after meeting with Auburn, and police believe that there may be more victims who have yet to come forward or be discovered. According to authorities, Auburn targeted her first known murder victim at a motel in Columbus in January of 2023 by sneaking fentanyl into his crack pipe. The man overdosed, and Auburn took off with his belongings. Similar deaths occurred at least 3 more times between then and late June. But a man who was victimized in December 2022 survived. Law enforcement began investigating after receiving a tip that Auburn was drugging and robbing her clientele. Auburn allegedly confessed to several of her crimes, but she's officially pleaded not guilty. She faces 28 different charges, including 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 5 counts of robbery, 5 counts of felony assault, 1 count of tampering with evidence, and 9 drug-related counts. The investigation into Auburn's suspected crimes appears to be ongoing, and authorities have urged anyone with information to come forward. Number 9. Daryati, the murderous housemaid. 23-year-old Daryati, who only goes by one name, was treated well by the family she worked for as a maid in Singapore's Telok Kurau community. Her boss, a wealthy 59-year-old businesswoman named Siao Kim Chu, was known for being a kind employer with an easygoing personality. But when Daryati grew homesick and began missing her partner, she became desperate to return to her home country of Indonesia, which she'd left due to a lack of economic opportunities. But moving back to Indonesia and staying there would require 2 things Daryati didn't have: money and a realistic way to financially support herself. She wanted to open a business, but she needed a way to fund the startup costs and was willing to take the money by force if necessary. On a June evening in 2016, Daryati attacked Siao with a knife in the master bathroom of the home. Siao's husband, 57-year-old Ong Thiam Soon, overheard the commotion and rushed upstairs to see what was going on. When he entered the room, Daryati charged at him with the 2 knives she'd just used to kill his wife. Ong fought back and was able to subdue Daryati despite being stabbed in the neck. He bound Daryati's hands, forced her outside, and then called out for help. A trio of Good Samaritans who were passing by helped restrain Daryati until the police arrived and took her into custody. In the meantime, Ong underwent emergency surgery for his stab wounds and ultimately survived his injuries. The medical examiner who performed Siao's autopsy noted that the victim had been attacked with such force that at least 3 of the blows had fractured her face. Diatti was charged with killing with the intention to cause death, which carries a mandatory death sentence if convicted. In 2020, 4 years after the stabbing, she was convicted of a lesser murder charge. Prosecutors planned to seek a life sentence, but Diatti decided that she wanted to argue a new defense based on mental illness in hopes of further mitigating her punishment. During a second trial, the defense claimed that Diatti suffered from major depression and that it made her less culpable due to her diminished mental capacity. Prosecutors argued that Diatti wasn't suffering from any mental disorders when she killed her employer and presented evidence to prove that Xiao's death was both premeditated and deliberate. In a diary entry from a month before the murder, Diatti had written about the urgent need to carry out her murderous plot and her willingness to risk the consequences of her actions. She also drew a layout of the house and plotted a path for killing Xiao and Ong, stealing their money, retrieving Xiao's passport, and fleeing the property. And shortly before executing her plan, the murderous maid hid several weapons throughout the home, including 2 knives and a hammer. The court sided with the prosecution and found Diatti guilty of murder, noting that the defense had based its argument almost entirely on the young woman's self-reported symptoms rather than credible evidence. So in the end, she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Number 8. Mary Bowen. In 1981, 45-year-old Mary Bowen took a job as a live-in nurse's aide for Mildred Cotter, an 82-year-old widow of a New York City police officer who lived in Long Island. 6 months later, Bowen called 911 in an apparent panic and reported that she'd found Cotter dead inside her Port Washington apartment. The elderly victim had been beaten and strangled to death, and the residence was ransacked, yet police found no signs of forced entry, leading them to believe that Cotter knew her killer. Investigators soon discovered that Cotter had become suspicious that Bowen was stealing after noticing a large amount of money had disappeared from her bank accounts. The senior citizen must have felt extremely betrayed by the caretaker she'd come to consider a close friend. She'd even made Bowen the sole beneficiary of her estate. According to police, Cotter made plans to fire Bowen after discovering the missing money. They believed that Cotter had confronted Bowen about the alleged theft and that Bowen proceeded to hatch a plot to kill her employer. She was accused of paying 2 male accomplices $1,000 each to murder Cotter and was charged with the crime alongside her co-conspirators, 25-year-old Andre Cartier and 28-year-old Roger Powell. During Bowen's trial, prosecutors revealed that she stole as much as $6,000 while working for Cotter by altering the amount on her $325 weekly paychecks. The state claimed that the wayward nurse's aide was worried that Cotter would cut her out of the will after being confronted about the missing money. Bowen was convicted of murder, conspiracy, burglary, and grand larceny, and as a result, she was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. She maintained her innocence throughout the case and continued to do so even after she was found guilty. Records show that she passed away in prison in 1995, more than a decade before she would have become eligible for parole. Andre Cartier and Roger Bowen were also convicted of murder and received the same sentence as Bowen. Cartier was paroled in 2008 and Bowen was released in 2012. Number 7. Gregory Thomas. In May of 2021, an employee at a storage business in Adams County, Colorado, noticed a putrid odor and a strange liquid oozing from a rented unit. The worker called law enforcement, and a responding deputy tried unsuccessfully to contact the renter, 36-year-old Gregory Thomas. He proceeded to call Thomas's emergency contact, who said that they believed Thomas had a freezer full of deer meat in the unit. Without the storage facility's owners present to open the door, the deputies weren't allowed to enter the unit, but they were summoned back to the business the next day after the manager spoke with Thomas, who allegedly promised to come by and clean the mess, but failed to follow through. The manager had decided to clean a unit himself, but wanted law enforcement there when he made entry. Upon opening the unit, he saw that the only thing it contained was a garbage can. Then, after laying plastic bags on the floor to avoid stepping directly on the liquid, the manager opened the garbage can and saw a human foot. Horrified by the sight and smell, he immediately ran out of the unit and past the deputy. The garbage can contained the decomposing body of 21-year-old Lavanya Jane, who'd gone missing more than 2 months earlier. She'd been shot to death, and Thomas appeared to have gone on the run. Authorities launched an investigation and a manhunt, leading to Thomas's eventual capture at an RV park near the Canadian border in Lyndon, Washington. Without enough evidence to charge him with Jane's murder, though, law enforcement took him into custody for a parole violation in an unrelated case and questioned him about the gruesome storage unit discovery. Unfortunately, only 2 people will ever know exactly what happened between Thomas and Jane, and one of them didn't survive to tell her side of the story. During questioning, Thomas said that he met Jane on an escort website in late 2020 and that she offered to partner up to commit white-collar crimes together. And as part of the plan, Thomas allowed Jane to live with him in the basement where he was staying at the time. Thomas claimed that on March 19, 2023, he entered his residence at a time when he didn't think Jane would be there. He said that he found the young woman sitting on the sofa and that she reached beneath a pillow and pointed a gun at him, prompting him to fire several shots in self-defense. Jane had allegedly told Thomas that she wanted him to take care of certain people who'd wronged her as a part of their planned crime spree, and she was supposedly angry that he'd failed to get the job done. After wrapping Jane's body in a blanket and going for a drive to think about his next move, Thomas bought a trash can at a Home Depot store and rented the storage unit that it was found in 2 months later. He put the slain woman's remains inside the can, taped it shut, and then simply left it there. Based on Thomas's narrative, it may sound like he made a mistake by trusting Jane, but prosecutors suspected the opposite and charged Thomas with first-degree murder, tampering with a deceased human body, and first-degree aggravated motor vehicle theft. In 2023, he pleaded guilty to a reduced second-degree murder charge and was sentenced to 48 years in prison. In a statement, District Attorney Brian Mason described Thomas's actions as abhorrent and Jane's death as an avoidable example of the cost of gun violence in the community. But he didn't go into detail about the circumstances surrounding the case and whether authorities believe Thomas's version of events. Number 6. Check a lie. In August 2014, the Washington County Sheriff's Office in Oregon received a complaint from a Salem woman accusing her roommate of scamming her out of thousands of dollars. She claimed that 23-year-old Vicheka Lai had befriended her and moved into her apartment, then stole her credit card and went on a shopping spree. While investigating the case, detectives learned of similar allegations that had been levied against Lai in at least 3 other counties. The victims reportedly included both friends and family, with several people suspecting that Lai had befriended them for the specific purpose of stealing from them. Speaking with ABC's 2020, aspiring pastry chef Taylor Nunes said that Lai approached her at a fundraiser in Portland earlier that year and showered her with compliments. Lai allegedly implied that she was connected with famous people and that she had a lot of money. Nunes noticed that Lai overdid it with the flattery, but her new friend also acted genuinely caring and was always there for her, including when the young woman's dog died, and soon enough, the 2 women grew so close that they decided to get an apartment together. During their search for a place to live, Lai told Nunes that she couldn't be on the lease because of her rental history. While this sounds like a glaringly obvious red flag, Nunes generously extended the benefit of the doubt to Lai and became the sole leaseholder on their apartment. Shortly after moving in together, Nunes noticed that $400 worth of unauthorized charges had been made to her credit card and that her expensive hair straightener had vanished. Around the same time, she noticed that Lai had a suspiciously large amount of money in her possession and that she was spending it like crazy. The next day, Nunes discovered a number of items missing from the place where she hid her valuables, including bank cards, her social security card, and $13,000 cash. She confronted Lai, who denied stealing the items and left just days later, never to return. Another woman named Leilani Gutierrez said that Lai had befriended her 6 years earlier when she was working as a grocery store cashier. They became extremely close, only for their friendship to suddenly end when Lai allegedly went on a spending spree with Leilani's credit card and stole the woman's passport. Gutierrez told 2020 that she discovered charges for multiple clothing stores, clubs, and cab rides, as well as 13 attempts to buy airline tickets, all over a 36-hour period. She accused Lai of trying to charge $8,000 worth of purchases altogether. Authorities apprehended Lai in Los Angeles after appealing to the public for information on her whereabouts. They caught her thanks to her new roommate, who Googled Lai's name one evening while she was out of the home and discovered that she was wanted in Oregon. The woman called the police, who showed up to arrest Lai right as she was arriving home from dinner. According to law enforcement, Lai had continued to scam people after moving to LA while pretending to be a Nike employee. Her thieving lifestyle started at least 3 years before her arrest, and she'd recently been accused of stealing a car from her own sister. Oddly enough, news about the case went quiet shortly after her arrest, and she's remained out of the spotlight ever since. Unfortunately, it's unclear if she was convicted of any of the criminal charges she faced. Number 5. Blair Anthony Watts. 43-year-old Jennifer Brown's family immediately knew something was wrong when she failed to pick her son up from his school bus stop in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, in January 2023. They soon learned that Brown's friend and business partner, 33-year-old Blair Anthony Watts, had already reported her missing. He was also the last known person to see Jennifer alive and spoke with a local news station about how stunned he was by her disappearance. Police found Jennifer's car in her driveway with her keys, wallet, purse, and work phone inside. Knowing that most people don't leave their houses without these items, investigators suspected foul play. And their fear only grew when cadaver dogs detected the scent of human remains in vehicles driven by Blair Watts. Brown and Watts were planning to open a restaurant together later that month, and Brown had paid her agreed share of $14,000 to Watts before her disappearance. According to authorities, Watts continued to pester Brown for money to pay for repairs and equipment at the building they were planning to rent. But unbeknownst to Jennifer, Blair had been denied a lease and hadn't paid any money toward the property. Bank records showed that on the day Jennifer vanished, someone transferred an additional $17,000 of Brown's money into Blair's bank account. Detectives grew even more suspicious of Watts after finding Brown's cell phone in his possession. Meanwhile, Watts told the press that he was sick of being poked at and claimed that he had nothing to do with his friend's disappearance. Several weeks after Brown went missing, police searched a wooded area in Royersford, where Watts had been tracked using cell phone data and surveillance footage from less than 2 days after she vanished. They found her body partially buried in a shallow grave behind an industrial complex. The medical examiner ruled that Jennifer was most likely asphyxiated and classified her death as a homicide. Watts was charged with Brown's murder, but pleaded not guilty and adamantly maintained his innocence. Prosecutors described Watts as a broke narcissist whose life was unraveling from financial ruin at the time of the murder. Defense attorney Benjamin Cooper called the case circumstantial at best and said that he planned to fight for his client's innocence. In December 2023, a jury found Watts guilty of first-degree murder, which carries a mandatory life term in Pennsylvania. He insisted to reporters that he was innocent as he was being led out of the courtroom, but it remains unclear whether he plans to appeal the case. Number 4. Jasmine Vasquez. During the summer of 2018, a 26-year-old Florida woman named Angela Caligari contacted Orlando-based news outlet WFTV with a plea for help clearing her name after a childhood friend stole her identity and got her falsely convicted of multiple crimes. Caligari discovered that she had a criminal record after receiving a subpoena in the mail ordering her to attend an upcoming court date. The culprit, whose real name is Jasmine Vasquez, had been caught stealing from a Target store in Sunrise. When police asked for her identity, she gave them Caligari's name, birth date, and a previous address that Caligari had lived at years earlier. Vasquez pleaded no contest to the charges under Caligari's name, leaving the innocent party with a theft conviction. After learning about the mix-up, authorities charged Vasquez with providing a false identity to the police. She pleaded guilty, but the conviction showed up in Florida's criminal system under Caligari's name, leaving the victim worried about how the record would affect her when it came to jobs and anything else requiring a background check. Caligari contacted the state's attorney's office, but felt that her complaint had fallen on deaf ears. Upset by the slow response to the matter and eager to clear her name, she went to Eyewitness News and asked them to investigate. Speaking with the media outlet, Caligari said that she was frustrated with both Vasquez and Seminole County authorities. She understandably wanted her record to accurately reflect her law-abiding lifestyle, but had reportedly been told that the confusing fingerprinting process had somehow led to an error in the system, tacking Vasquez's charges to her name. After being contacted by the news, the state attorney's office picked up the pace with its efforts to resolve the issue. And in August 2019, a full year after Caligari first reached out to WFTV, she was happy to report that the problem had been fixed and her life had returned to normal. In the meantime, Vasquez was serving a 3-year prison sentence for multiple convictions, including the criminal use of Caligari's identity. Describing Vasquez as an extremely convincing liar, Assistant State Attorney Dominic Leo told the station that part of the confusion stemmed from Caligari's name being listed as one of Vasquez's aliases. He said that Caligari's name would remain on that list, but that none of her personal information would be connected with it. Caligari's story may sound unusual, but the state attorney's office said that these types of ID fraud cases are becoming increasingly popular. The agency recommended Googling your name every 3 months and opting out of websites that collect and list people's personal information. Number 3. Eddie Blizzard. As a licensed and registered broker and investment advisor in the state of Maryland, Eddie Blizzard was entrusted with using his clients' hard-earned life savings to secure a stable financial future for them. During the early 2000s, he began serving a former air conditioning technician who'd recently retired in the 7-figure range, despite only having a 9th grade education and being illiterate. Unable to accept promotions that were offered to him because he couldn't read or write, the man, known as RM, spent his entire career routinely working overtime in order to build up his savings. Then, after retiring, he decided to invest his retirement funds so he could leave behind an inheritance for his grandchildren. In 2005, Blizzard told RM that he'd left the bank so he could work independently. He offered to continue managing the senior citizens' money, but said that it would be a while before he had his new office set up. From that point forward, their monthly meetings took place in Blizzard's car, which RM found unusual, but he continued allowing Blizzard to handle his money. According to court documents, Blizzard began asking RM for signed blank checks in 2010. RM didn't know what the checks were for, but he handed over at least 15 of them at Blizzard's request. Due to his illiteracy, RM was unable to withdraw cash from ATMs, so when he needed money, he went to the bank and withdrew funds by writing a check out to cash for the desired amount. On at least 12 separate occasions, he was told that there wasn't enough money in his account to withdraw any cash. And every time, Blizzard told RM that the funds would be in his account within a day or two. Believing his money was protected, RM never asked Blizzard why he kept running into problems at the bank. He finally realized he'd been robbed clean in 2019 when he tried withdrawing money at the bank and was once again told that there wasn't enough money in his account. He tried calling Blizzard for a week straight, but got no answer. RM then went to Blizzard's residence, but nobody answered the door. While there, he received a voicemail from Blizzard stating that the neighbors complained about RM banging on the door. He said that all of RM's money was gone and that he was in a psychiatric hospital after having a mental health crisis. The following month, Blizzard emailed RM's son claiming that he'd lost his father's money through bad investments. He apologized and said that he couldn't go into too much detail because he was being monitored. RM's family got the law involved, and investigators failed to find any evidence that Blizzard was hospitalized as he claimed. They also found records indicating that Blizzard had stolen RM's entire life savings of $1.4 million. At some point over the years, the victim had received a letter from the IRS informing him that he owed $63,000 in taxes for retirement account withdrawals, but because he didn't know how to read, he turned the letter over to Blizzard and trusted that the matter was taken care of. After realizing that he'd been scammed, RM discovered that Blizzard had failed to make his mortgage payments as promised and that his house was in foreclosure. Investigators never figured out what Blizzard did with all of RM's money, but they found no evidence of it being lost to bad investments. Records showed that over a 3-year period starting in 2016, Blizzard and his wife deposited 112 of RM's personal checks into their own bank accounts, totaling $848,000. During that same period, the couple withdrew over $500,000 in cash. Knowing that investments aren't typically funded in cash, authorities suspected that Blizzard took the money for his own use and knowingly drained his client's retirement. RM passed away in 2020 at the age of 75. In December 2023, Blizzard pleaded guilty to bank fraud in federal court as part of a plea agreement. He will be required to pay over $1 million in restitution, but he may not get around to paying it anytime soon. Blizzard faces up to 20 years in prison and is scheduled to be sentenced in April 2024. Number 2. Ashley Wright. Numerous innocent people's lives were upended in Knox County, Tennessee in 2017 when a local middle school teacher named Ashley Wright stole their identities and racked up large debts in their names. She allegedly targeted mainly close friends and family members, including her mother-in-law, 2 neighbors, and 3 colleagues. Authorities charged her with multiple crimes in August of that year, and she was suspended from her teaching job while the matter played out in court. In one case, Wright was accused of obtaining a credit card using her sister-in-law's information and charging $3,900 worth of purchases to the account. The victim testified in court about Wright's extravagant spending habits, which dated back to their high school years. According to the victim, Wright blew through a trust fund and turned to stealing in the years leading up to the identity theft cases. Wright also tried obtaining a loan using her brother-in-law's information. The brother-in-law would later tell the court that Wright never apologized for her actions, which left him with financial issues that took countless hours for him to resolve. Wright's neighbor and his wife also gave victim impact statements describing how the defendant made $3,000 in unauthorized charges in the husband's name and how the fraudulent activity could have jeopardized his job. They accused Wright of going to elaborate lengths to deflect suspicion away from herself, including by telling the couple that she'd seen someone stealing their mail. Like the other victims who spoke in court, they said that Wright never apologized or showed remorse for her actions. According to court documents, Wright also made a $557 utility charge to a friend's debit card while holding the victim's purse during a seminar. And she even stole $200 in cash from her best friend's purse. In addition to having their credit and finances ravaged, the victims suffered emotionally as a result of Wright's crimes, which caused them to lose trust in people altogether. The theft also drove a wedge between Wright and several family members, leaving the victims' children feeling confused and upset about why they could no longer see her. Wright took a plea offer and admitted to 5 counts of identity theft and 1 misdemeanor theft charge. The victims urged the court to impose prison time, citing fears that she'd return to teaching, while the defense argued for a diversion program, which would have enabled Wright to avoid any major convictions by following certain rules set forth by the court. Her attorney claimed that she'd suffered from postpartum depression and was out of touch with reality when she committed her crimes. But to her victims, this seemed like little more than a pitiful excuse for her wrongdoings. Much to the disappointment of parties on both sides of the case, Wright was sentenced to 2 days in jail and 2 years of probation. She was ordered to pay restitution and continue with mental health treatment, and her teaching license was revoked. Number 1. Lyle Ty Hoffman. Minnesota restaurateurs Ty Hoffman and Kelly Phillips learned the hard way that it truly is a bad idea to mix business dealings with one's personal life. In 2009, during the 15 years they spent living together as a couple, they opened a popular lounge in Minneapolis called the Lush Food Bar. Hoffman and Phillips eventually broke up, but remained business partners for several years. For a while, they maintained an amicable working relationship. Phillips owned the business and Hoffman managed the restaurant's day-to-day operations while renting a nearby apartment that Phillips owned. But the seemingly smooth arrangement between the ex-boyfriends soured in 2013 after Phillips became engaged to another man. Around the same time, Phillips discovered financial discrepancies that led him to believe Hoffman was stealing large amounts of money from the restaurant. The deposits being made into the business's bank account were substantially less than the amounts detailed in the financial records that Hoffman kept, and when Phillips confronted him about the numbers not adding up, Hoffman refused to procure additional records to explain the difference. With all trust broken, Phillips fired Hoffman and evicted him from the apartment. In August 2014, exactly 1 year to the day after Phillips got engaged to his new boyfriend, he and Hoffman were seen arguing loudly in a car outside a gas station at 8 a.m. Witnesses saw Phillips exiting the car and trying to run away as Hoffman pulled a .45 caliber pistol out and fired it twice. As Phillips lay dying on the ground, Hoffman stood over him and fired several more shots, as if to make extra sure the victim was dead. He then got back into the car and ran over Phillips's body as he sped away from the scene. The BMW that Hoffman fled in turned out to be stolen and was found abandoned shortly after the murder. 3 weeks later, Hoffman robbed a bank in Blaine and was seen in various places, including the Mall of America and a casino in Shakopee. He was finally apprehended outside an Arby's restaurant a month after the murder. During questioning, Hoffman claimed that on the day of the murder, the car he was driving had broken down outside the gas station. He said that he and Phillips just happened to cross paths by chance and that they got into an argument after he asked his ex for a ride. It's unclear, though, whether or not he had an explanation for how he managed to drive away in the supposedly broken down car. Hoffman pleaded guilty to a state charge of second-degree murder and a federal bank robbery charge. He received a 25.5-year prison sentence for the murder charge, with the requirement to serve at least 17 years behind bars. In addition, he was ordered to serve a 5-year sentence for the bank robbery, which he's serving concurrently with his murder sentence. Even in the event of a falling out, let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.